What's up, everybody? Flan Speaks is back for its final Game of Thrones Season 8 complete season review. So slap a like on this, subscribe if you're not subscribed. We're going to get into this right here. Season 8, I can only put in a few words. I mean, I'm going to go through kind of like each episode and give my feeling on it. It's a complete season episode, season review. I mean, it isn't like a situation where I'm going to just give a I can just judge it based off of one episode. However, how things end weighs heavily on how we judge it. So that is going to play a part in it. But without any further ado, yeah, here we go. Episode 1 for me, at the time when it dropped and when I first watched it, my knee jerk reaction was that it was very good. I gave it a very high rating, around a 9 out of 10. I liked it because I understood what it was. I don't expect a lot of action in the first episode. Game of Thrones, they pretty much never give us that in the first episode. So I judged it for what it was, as a setup episode, as an exposition episode to set us up for the rising action. Now, like I said, at the time it was 9 out of 10. Now, looking back on it, I found a few ways in which they could have done it better. And I'm saying this from, filmmaking standpoint. Now, I don't claim to be Ridley Scott, I'm not. But there are certain things that are basic and that are elemental and fundamental to effective story writing when you're trying to get to a certain point at the end that requires a certain type of setup in the beginning that helps the ending make sense. For example, we know now that the showrunners were given the task of making Daenerys Targaryen the Mad Queen, okay, in the end, which means she'd be the ultimate villain and the ultimate antagonist in the end. The first mistake they made here was starting us off with her and Jon Snow being the first characters shown. Now, the first main character shown was Arya Stark, and we know why, because she ultimately was the star of the first half of the season by getting the death blow on the Night King. But episode 1 started with us seeing Jon and Daenerys' procession entering into Winterfell. This gives off the impression that Jon and Daenerys are the protagonists, with one of them being a protagonist and the other being the main character. Okay. Now, if what they wanted to do was have her in the end go this Mad Queen route, it would have been better. It would have been better and more convincing in the end to shoot everything from Winterfell's perspective. So the first characters shown should have been Bran, Sansa, and the Northerners. They should have been shown first, with us only seeing Jon and Daenerys come in, so that everything will be shot from their perspective. I know this doesn't seem like a big deal to a lot of you, but it really is a big deal. All of these things play a part in how the audience is receptive to what happens in the end when you try to force this whole narrative of Daenerys being the ultimate villain. When you shoot it from her perspective, the audience automatically assumes that this is your protagonist. This is why traditionally the protagonist is always filmed first and the antagonist comes later. This, in my opinion, was mistake number 1. Now, the exception to this is Avengers, the Avengers, the one before Endgame, where Thanos was shot first. That happens. But as you notice, in the end of that, Thanos was the winner. It was in Endgame where Tony Stark was shot first. And this is the one where Thanos was the ended up being the loser, you see. All of that plays a part in it. There's a particular formula to this that has worked for years. But Dan and Dave kind of went against the grain. So here you're noticing again, it's still shot from Daenerys' perspective here. She's coming in and meeting Sansa for the first time. So the impression is given that Sansa is the either a foil character or she is like an antagonist to Daenerys, which is what she kind of appeared to be throughout the first 3 episodes of the season. What they elected to do was have Daenerys, be very mannerly and give Sansa a compliment and everything, with Sansa just being cold and appearing to be very which again I believe was a mistake. If your plan is in the end for Daenerys to be the ultimate villain, you have to make Sansa somewhat of a sympathetic character. They did not do that. So instead of, and I understand they're going with the subvert expectations thing, but it's very, very difficult to pull off. And we see why it didn't work, among other things. Now I'm going to take a minute to speak on the Jon and Daenerys relationship. Unlike many of the content creators out here, apparently, I was a big believer in this particular relationship. And it's for a number of reasons. One reason was the relationship for me made narrative sense. When you consider R plus L equal J, and when you consider Daenerys Targaryen being this Queen Targaryen alone in the world without any other family, and when you considered how family was a big theme last season, even when you look at the last episode, family was a big theme. You had the Starks converging together. You had the Lannister drama between them. You had, so with that, to have the two Targaryens who have never met each other before until last season actually come and meet, family obviously was a big theme. And then to crown Jon a king, crown Daenerys a queen, have them meet. It made complete narrative sense that these two particular characters would get together, especially when you contrast that with the Euron Greyjoy and Cersei Lannister storyline they were going with. I mean, they decided to do away with Victarion and the Greyjoy brothers and just streamline it down to Euron. So with that, it made complete narrative sense to have that power couple in the South and this power couple, from Dragonstone and also in the North. Now, as far as like their chemistry between the two actors, I really had no problem with it. I know some people look at it and they say, I never felt chemistry between Emilia Clarke and Kit Harington and all of that. And I don't really know what that means. It's a man and a woman. Two are attracted to each other. One is a king, one is a queen. It just makes narrative sense for me. I don't know. People judging the quality of how they kiss each other. See, I don't really get into all of that. I don't even know what that really means. People's, that all of that is kind of subjective to me. But what I can tell you is that when you look at season 7 for the most part was really almost a failure on a number of levels. You had Daenerys Targaryen coming into Westeros, okay, with her eyes set on the Iron Throne. You had Tyrion Lannister as her hand. You had Yara Greyjoy as an ally. You had Dorne as an ally. You had Highgarden as an ally. For all intents and purposes, this group should have beaten Cersei's group. I give you a number of reasons for that. Daenerys was coming in with the group that kind of fit the theme of cripples, bastards, and broken things. When you add Jon, he was perceived as a bastard. You have Tyrion, you have her who's been broken through her life experience. Everything kind of shaped up for them to win. They really irrationally had her constantly lose these battles. None of it made any sense. The only way it possibly made sense was if she's going to lose Highgarden and she's going to lose the Iron Islands, and if she's going to lose Dorne, that will be replaced by Jon Snow and the North. That's the only narrative sense that it made. Secondly, you have the two Targaryens come together, and I was under the impression that House Targaryen was an important house to the story. Since then, after looking at this season, I don't know about that. It seems like House Targaryen was completely thrown under the bus. for the Starks, and that saddens me greatly, especially when you consider the way they did it. I will challenge anyone that season 7 was a failure, with the exception of the Jon and Daenerys storyline and their arc. Because if you just were to imagine season 7, imagine taking out the Jon and Daenerys story from season 7, what would you have? You really wouldn't have much of anything, to be honest with you. It's what carried the season. Now, people will criticize it, they'll say what they say. But I'll challenge you, the majority of the people, they love the story. Look at the countless numbers of videos you see people put together about Jon and Daenerys. Read the comments under their videos. Look at the number of views their videos get with Jon and Daenerys talking to each other, saying sweet things to each other, or their little sex encounter on the boat. It was a big thing. It honestly was one of the most popular things in pop culture a couple of years ago. And I contend, okay? I understand, I get this isn't where the writers were going. It isn't where George R. R. Martin was going. However, I will tell you right now, no matter how vanilla you think it is, no matter how predictable you think it is, had the story had been that these two characters, one up in the north, Jon, one over in the east, were just separated from their royal family of birth, only to go through the various challenges they went through with similar arcs to meet, and that meeting be the very element or the very thing that's needed to save the realm from both the White Walkers and from tyranny that is on the hands of the Lannisters. That would have been one of the greatest stories ever written, and it would have been a successful season had they kept this relationship intact. I would challenge anyone to tell me otherwise. Compare such an ending to what you have now, where the idea is, okay, one of them has to go crazy and the one has to kill the other, and the failure that came. In my opinion, that was going to be a failure regardless. If you were going to do it over 12 seasons, over 15 seasons, over 25 seasons, or if you were going to do it in 8 seasons, that it would be a failure. And it would be a failure because such an ending is a Shakespearean type of ending. It's a classical writing type of ending, classical novels. That was very popular in the 1500s during that time. What I'm telling you is in the year 19 or 2019, that isn't very popular. It's not going to work, especially amongst the genre. Well, it may have been fine amongst the genre if you're talking about the fantasy genre in general, but the crowd that it reached. You see, in every particular genre, there are two divisions, really, similar to like rap music, for example. You have rap music for the hardcore rap fans, okay, who will just buy the underground stuff. And then you have rap that has gone pop, that the hardcore people don't like. Similarly, you have this in heavy metal, where some people will like, real hardcore people, I heard this group called Unbirthed Feces or something like that, fetus, dying fetus or something. That's for hardcore people. Whereas then you'll have something like Daughtry for people that aren't hardcore, Guns N' Roses or something like that. The same thing with the fantasy genre. George R. R. Martin in the fantasy genre would be considered something like, if it was in rap, he'd be like NWA, in the 1990s, in the early 1990s, where that's really for hardcore real rap people. Whereas when it becomes pop, no, you need to be like Young MC, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, okay? So what I'm saying is Game of Thrones reach beyond the hardcore fantasy genre people who would be okay with, something like, a lover killing another lover. However, it reached a wider audience of people who don't relate to that. Now, one thing everyone relates to is a love story. So had they went the route of it just being a love story of two people that saved the realm, some of the hardcore people would have hated it, but there would not be the outrage that they're facing right now. And I'm thinking that what they should have done was had one version for television and the other version that George can do in the books. This would have been smarter for business. At any rate, I don't want to linger on with this. This isn't really my subject today. Continuing on with episode one, Jon Snow riding the dragon. I thought it was awesome. I mean, I understand. It could have been done a little bit better with Danny being a little bit more instructive. You know, maybe they could have rode on one by themselves alone. He could have rode with her like she could have been on the one with him at the same time on Rhaegal to show him how to do it. That would have made it more believable. But ultimately, I still have no problem with it. I was just excited to see Jon Snow on a dragon in general. And I was really geeked and stoked at this time. I really believed that Jon would have a dragon, Daenerys would have a dragon, man. And you know, these two would be bringing back that Targaryen tradition. Like I said, the Targaryen is my favorite family, is my favorite storyline in the whole thing. I can't stop reading Fire and Blood and the Dunk and Egg trilogies. I love that history. And I think it's a travesty, you know, what they did with that bloodline. For me, I can't imagine the story without Targaryens. And this idea of killing Daenerys Targaryen, who was to me is the second greatest Targaryen to ever live, and then to have Jon Snow be this Targaryen with all this potential that is never realized ultimately is really, really, really saddening that all of this writing led up to this. At any rate, at this point, I was very pleased to see Jon be a dragon rider. Okay. Now, other interesting things that took place in this episode was Cersei meeting up, you know, with the Golden Company, Harry Strickland. They had me thinking that something was going to come out of that. That was very, very disappointing what happened. But at the time, I felt like this was a good episode. So for me, at the time, episode one was given a 9. As I look back on it and seeing how they did not execute a lot of what was perceived to have been set up, it doesn't receive as high a rating from me. The Jon and Daenerys thing ended up being a disaster. And so did the Golden Company. So it kind of like, in retrospect, is almost like a 4 for me, unfortunately. Oh, of course, I can't forget. Then there, of course, was the big reveal to Jon Snow, the end of episode one, when he found out who he was, that he was Aegon Targaryen. At this time, I thought this was going to be a big deal and was going to serve a plot point much better than the one it ended up serving. Episode 2, of course, saw Jaime Lannister come in and everything. Now, my rating for episode 2 at the time was I loved episode 2. At the time, I gave it a 10 out of 10. I really like where they were going with the characters. I felt like all the characters had made progressed in their arcs. You had Daenerys, who was willing to be merciful to Jaime Lannister, you know, not killing him. This fit the way she kind of always was. Of course, there's going to be some drama there. You know, she's going to think about it, but she listened to her advisors, which was in character for her throughout. She also addressed Tyrion in his failures, which I felt like she should have been fired him last season after he lost 2 battles. That should have been it, as far as I'm concerned. It's nothing personal. It's just that when you're not qualified, you're not qualified. You had the setup for the battle. I liked pretty much almost everything about this episode, with the exception of even the Arya stuff. I would say didn't bother. I didn't have a problem with her with Gendry. I always felt like these two characters would, you know, do something. The only problem I have again is with what they did with it. Here you have a character progressing, okay? All right. And that's the big problem that I have with the season. And, you know, it's this idea that everyone goes back to what they initially were. That is like so cynical and horrible to me. Like, but at any rate, I was never a person that believed, okay, that, you know, Arya being 9 years old, just saying, you know, that's not me and this and that. For me, a 9-year-old doesn't know what the hell they want to be. I don't support the idea of a 6-year-old girl wanting a sex change, or a 6-year-old boy wanting a sex change, or anything like that. The way I was raised and the way I am even with my children. If we go out to eat, they don't even get to choose what they're going to eat off the menu. I decide for them. Okay. I don't believe in children knowing what they want. No, children have to be educated. They have to learn, and then they get to make those types of decisions. So I was never a big proponent of that. That Arya, you never is going to want a man or get married, because it goes against the biological reality of people. It's stupid. So the idea of Arya going on and having sex, I was with. However, I believed that they would go the route of her deciding not to go be this knight, this fighter, and that she would go and marry Gendry, settle down, and do this for her house. I don't like the idea of just going out and being this traveler. I don't think that's realistic for people. And I'm sorry, I like realistic things, even in fantasy, because the way fantasy is sold to people is that it has to have an element of realism. I mean, if it's all just about it's fantasy and make believe and fiction, and like I said, you could just have aliens come out of the sky at any point and stuff like that. No, things have to make in world sense. And that's one of the things I did not like, was what they did with Arya after having her make what I felt was a progression, which seemed to be things that they did pretty much with everyone. Other things I loved about episode, I loved all the Jaime Lannister stuff. I loved all the Jaime with Tyrion stuff. I loved all the conversation, the dialogue. I loved all the Jaime with Brienne stuff. I absolutely loved him knighting her. I thought that was awesome. I loved the Jenny Oldstone's reference and the singing. I was like, man, I was really excited about the season at this point. I felt they were going to go the right direction. I felt they were being as faithful as they can to the core material and to the character arcs and development. I was all on board at this point. So that episode really is the episode that got a 10 out of 10 for me, was episode 2. It ended off with Jon telling Daenerys who he really was, who his true parents was. And I absolutely loved this scene. And this was the last time Jon Snow was Jon Snow. Listen, this is the last time Jon Snow was Jon Snow. Jon Snow looked Daenerys in the face, in the eye, and like a grown man, he explained to her this. She challenged him. He said, "No, Dany, I know it's true. I loved it because he was alpha male, okay? Complete masculine man telling her what it was." Now, what I don't like is what happened afterwards, because I was led astray. This was the way Jon was with Daenerys last season, right? It wasn't all this, you're my queen, this talk. No, he had some sense of who and what he was, that he was a king himself, right? And this is what Daenerys needed if she's going to be in a relationship with someone. She needs someone that's going to be firm with her, okay? Be a man, okay? Women need a real man, and that's what Jon Snow was for that very moment here during this scene. I absolutely loved it. For me, it was perfect execution. Her response, I didn't judge a lot immediately, because knee-jerk reactions and knee-jerk responses to new information that is hard-hitting, I don't think can be judged until a person has a time to process that and to think about it. So at this time, I was all on board with even the way she reacted, which was briefly interrupted by the coming of the White Walkers. Episode 3, of course, marks the starting point when things went downhill for most people. I myself didn't have as much a problem with episode 3 as many people did. As you know, in my predictions, I predicted that the Night King would be defeated. Now, when I look back, that had not been the case. I wish I would have been wrong about that. But I believe Dan and Dave, they figured this would be the easy route. So that's what they would do. And I kind of was right about that. That is what they. As we know, the Night King was defeated. There was no Azor Ahai. There was no Nisa Nisa. There was no prince that was promised. None of those types of things that was related to the Night King storyline. They went with a very streamlined, simple thing of, this guy being a White Walker like the rest of them. However, maybe he was just the one in charge. What killed him is the same thing that kills any of them. And then they used Arya Stark to do it. At the time, I was not as upset as many people were, though the way it was done, I must admit, was quite cheesy. Not a lot of thought went into it, not a lot of creativity. This man was surrounded by White Walkers. Jon Snow was stuck by a dragon. I mean, there's a myriad of ways they could have done this better. Yeah, it was kind of sad. At the time, I rated this about a 5 or 6. The episode all total, it was dark. You couldn't see a lot of it. There was a lot of problems with it. I don't really want to go into it. I'm sure everyone listening has seen this episode, maybe at least 5 times or so, and it really didn't go well. Oh man, there's so many ways this could have been done. It could have been done better, but it is what it is. This episode wasn't horrible for me. It was just meh. Next came, of course, episode 4, which I rated a -1. For me, at the time, it was the worst episode of Game of Thrones I had ever seen. And the main reason is I felt every single character progression we saw had regressed. And I have never, in my history of watching television, ever seen anything like that on this level at this scale. I couldn't believe it. The Jon and Daenerys relationship was completely butchered. They spent a lot of time last season when they wanted to make it work. They presented the two characters as equals when they wanted it to work. Even when he bent the knee at the time when he's laying in the bed, you didn't get the feeling that he was a subject. No, the feeling you got was that they were coming together as equals in an alliance. Even when you look at their sex scene, you gotta understand all these things are foreshadowings to a good writer. Her being on top, then him on top. It signifies that he would take control of the relationship. That's how foreshadowing works. However, they do things without it being foreshadowing. It was horrible writing to make him all of a sudden this emasculated subject to her, where she has all of the logic, he has none. He does not know her, nor does he know his own family. He believes that he could tell Sansa something without it ever becoming a problem. Awful writing in order to force something, which is making this woman who is the breaker of chains, the freer of slaves, the mother of dragons, the Misa in the East, crazy. It is the worst free fall that I've ever seen in my life, and I am not serious. And I am very, very serious about that. Jaime Lannister, my God. They had this man. Matter of fact, all of these characters, they had them converge together during episode 3 in order to fight the White Walkers. Only to, after the battle, not gain a lick of respect, not gain a lick of camaraderie, not gain a lick of love for one another. That is so unrealistic. It's known that when people fight together against a common enemy, they gain respect for each other. It's the way Jon was a foe of Tormund. They hated each other. However, they gained a respect for each other at the Battle of the Bastards when they worked together at Hardhome. That's what happened with these things. And to make that a common theme in the show, to only make this battle, which was the Great War against the White Walkers, not turn into something that brought people together, was the worst writing I've ever seen. I've never seen something so illogical, to where every character is progressing in episode 2. Going into episode 3, when they reach the apex, they bring in and converging together to fight the White Walkers, to only after that have every single character convert back to the character they were in season 1. Like you had Daenerys become her brother Viserys. You had Jon turn back into the naive little boy who joined the Night's Watch. You had Jamie turned back to the guy who pushed Bran out the window. He even made a reference to that I pushed the man out the window and all of that to go back to Cersei, and for it to not even be nuanced enough to where most of us assumed that he was lying to Brienne in order to prevent her, to stop him from going to kill Cersei. But no, he sincerely turned back into season one Jamie, to have Brienne turn back into just this crying person, reminiscent of how she was when Renly died. Like, oh my God, this is like literally some of the worst stuff I've ever seen in episode 4. That's why I said it was the worst episode I'd ever seen of Game of Thrones at the time. And I still feel that way. I actually think it's even worse now when I look back on it. Have Arya progress, grow up, and consider, being about men, to have her go back to season one the way she was when she was 8, 9 years old or whatever is unbelievably bad. Unbelievably bad. What you're saying is that people don't learn from their experiences. They don't grow because not one character grew. Not one character grew. Tyrion actually became worse. Tyrion was considered a very intelligent character in the beginning. To only go back to being stupid. Varys goes back to being very, very, very stupid. And we've never seen him to be stupid. So either characters went back to what they were, or they went back to a childhood time. This was unbelievable. And to think that the whole reason to do this was so that they could execute this horrible idea. And I'm going to tell you, it's a horrible idea to make Daenerys Targaryen the ultimate villain. Saddens me to no end. Which takes us to episode 5. Now, if you follow my channel, you know exactly how I feel about this. I absolutely hate what they did with this. If George does it, I will probably hate that as well, because you got to understand. Let me just make this clear. And I know I've said this in a number of different ways, but I'm going to be as frank as I can here. When you decide to incorporate certain elements into your story, whether it's fantasy, whatever type of fantasy it is, and you incorporate hot button topics like slavery, okay, hot button topics like different cultures and race, you have to be very careful how you take care of it, because these things are very hot button. These things mean a lot to people. Now, this particular character, Daenerys, is very nuanced and very, very complicated. And that's great. This is why this character is very important to the story. However, what you did was you made this character the one character that cared about slavery and the plight of those people suffering. You got to keep that in mind. Now, what happens ultimately in the story with her is a travesty for a number of reasons. And let me explain. When we go back to season 1, okay, you have Eddard Stark as the major protagonist. And you even have it where one could argue that he is the greatest character of the show, that his ethos, his morality, his way of thinking is what's considered the driving theme in the show, that nobody would argue. Eddard Stark was right. Now, when you make Daenerys Targaryen the major villain, what you're doing is undoing everything about Eddard Stark. Season 1, Eddard Stark, when he's told by Robert Baratheon about the prospects of Daenerys Targaryen marrying Khal Drogo, Eddard Stark starts a big argument with Robert about protecting her. Rob wants to kill her. Robert Baratheon wants to kill her. Eddard Stark takes his hand of the kingpin and throws it at Robert because he wants to protect the life of Daenerys. And this is because he knows of the Targaryen relationship with his sister Lyanna, etc., and he's against killing the children. Now, when you do that, when you make her the worst person ever in King's Landing, you're saying Eddard Stark was wrong. This is like some of the most cynical stuff. I've never seen anything this cynical in all my years of listening to stories or of watching a story. And I'm trying to figure out why. What are you doing? What are you saying? Like, Eddard Stark was wrong? There are literally two characters, in my opinion, who were assassinated character-wise the most: Stannis Baratheon and Daenerys Targaryen. Now, anyone who supports Eddard Stark and believes him to be the best character, they must support Daenerys and they must support Stannis. Stannis, at the death of Robert, was the one who had the rightful king. He was the rightful king, and Eddard Stark literally died supporting Stannis. And then he also threw away his pen to support um, Daenerys. Like, Robert Baratheon's last wish before he died was he said, okay, the girl Daenerys, let her live. Do you understand? All right. And to say that these guys were wrong is like, what the fuck are you writing? There's nothing cohesive here in this narrative. Then you have people arguing that, Daenerys Targaryen was wrong, for hanging slavers and killing them. Well, not according to Ned Stark. Do you understand that Eddard Stark wanted to kill Jorah Mormont? Why? Because he bought and sold slaves. That was the reason. So according to Ned, dealing in slavery, the penalty is death. The only character who actually carried that out is Daenerys. Like, really think about that. Like, whether this is your favorite character or not, I'm saying you have to see the holes in the plot that ultimately, when you see the story narrowed down to the end, that the story doesn't make any freaking sense. And the only thing I can say is that either the author is bad, the showrunners are bad, they're clearly bad, or it's all cynicism in the end. It's all cynicism. Like, if it's being done on purpose, it's all cynicism. And if it's a bunch of mistakes, then it's just bad writing, man. Period. Well, at any rate, we get the destruction of King's Landing in that episode, okay? And then in the final episode, you get Jon killing Daenerys because Daenerys all of a sudden now wants to rule the world and go around leveling cities everywhere. And I understand there's some people in the fan base who believes that this is what she is. I don't even want to argue with y'all. I'm not even having a conversation with y'all because, I went through each thing. I already did a whole video on that, the longest video I've ever done. And no, and I'm reading the books again. I'm actually going chapter by chapter, and I will literally be putting out a video dealing with, from the book perspective, is it likely that this will happen in the books? Right now, I really don't see it because, when you judge characters in a vacuum, you'll come up with stuff like that. But if you're judging based off of the narrative here, this particular story, every character in this whole show has the potential to go mad. All right. We got Arya, who cuts off people's faces, who, cut up two of, Frey's sons and fed them, turned them into pies and fed them to him. Okay, this is what Arya Stark did. She killed his whole damn family. Look at what she did to Metatron, stabbed him in the eyes, all of those different things. We cheered that on. Sansa Stark, so many people's darling, she had Ramsay Bolton fed dogs to dogs. Okay, she sat there and watched and smirked and smiled. Okay, by the logic that Daenerys didn't feel anything when her brother died, that she would one day go mad. Everybody in this damn book thinking go mad. Jon Snow kills Janos Slynt even after Janos, just for refusing his order. And even after Janos Slynt begged and pleaded for mercy, telling him he would obey him, Jon still cut his head off. Okay, so does this mean Jon can go mad? Jon, he hangs Ollie and he hangs Sir Alistair and all these guys after they killed him, right? Was he supposed to be merciful there? Or, is what he did, okay? Okay, people do shit to people in this story, and then those people fuck them up, right? That's just what happens. That's what happens. People kill each other in this story. Like this idea, okay, this person can go mad because, they killed this person and this person doesn't. Like, come on, man. And then, what they did here, it's a shame. They having her just succumb to what she genetically just disposed to do. It was horrible. It means that people don't learn from life experiences, and they do what they're just genetically disposed to do, right? And it's just, man, I don't even know where to go. And then in the end, we have the one sitting on the throne, Bran Stark. Whew. I really don't know how George is going to do this in the books. Honestly, for me, in the books, when you look at qualified to be king or leader in the books, really Aegon the Sixth, young Griff, is probably the most qualified to do it. That is what kind of makes sense. Bran, man, I don't know how George is going to do that and it makes sense. Maybe he's not trying to make sense. Maybe he's just going to be cynical about the whole thing. I don't know. But the ending was so cynical. You had Bronn as the master of coin. Bronn is a cutthroat. Tyrion is a failed hand. He's the hand of the king. Sam is not even a fully trained maester, and he's the maester. You have, Brienne, which is fine. Podrick, I mean, okay. If they didn't went from Gerald Hightower and people like Jaime Lannister and people like Charles the Dane and people like Pod, yeah. And then all the open-ended things, man. We don't know what happened with Daenerys' body. We don't know where Drogon went. We don't know what the hell Jon is doing. Like, it's my review. This season was so disappointing. It was really disappointing. It doesn't even make me angry. It hurts more than anything, honestly, because people put their time into it. Blood Moon, I don't know. I guess I'll probably watch it because it'll probably benefit my channel. If people watch it, me putting content there. But like I said, I explained in the beginning why the story didn't work. I believe the setup that they put in the exposition never received proper payoff. I believe the way they shot things, from the perspective they shot things, was a mistake. And ultimately, it didn't work. Rotten Tomatoes, the season was a failure, and that's a shame. It's a shame that a show that, man, 2 months ago I would have told you is the greatest show ever put on a screen. I felt it was greater than Star Wars movies. I felt it was greater than, like, man, up there with The Wire, Breaking Bad, and things like that. I don't know where to rank it. Seasons 1 through 5, I think were great, especially 1 through 4. 5 was, with the except for the Dorne storyline. Oh man. For the most part, it weren't so bad to where Game of Thrones still wasn't the greatest television show ever. To now, I don't know where you rank this thing. It was just a travesty to me. So. Well, that's pretty much it. My wrap up for the season. I will not be talking about this season again, unless it's just something specific, but nothing about like a review for the whole season. So with that, Falan Speaks. I'm out. To make a living.